This is Talkback 721-1290 or 1-800-568-5309.
This is Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 98.3 FM. KGVO, Missoula's news and weather station.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Thursday, November 14th edition of Talkback. Talkback this morning is brought to you by Phillips Janitorial with residential and commercial cleaning. They'll clean your home and your business. No job too big or small for Phillips, 406-260-6617. Also brought to you by Y West Storage. They're out at the Y, of course, on Two Smokes Way. If you need some storage, here's the number, 406-510-0590. At Y West, we're making room for you. By 123 Seamless Gutters. They're family owned and operated, and they do everything with gutters so you don't have to. Call 406-240-2669. They're protecting the foundation of your future. And finally, by Harrington Surgical Supply, where you can feel confident in their discreet and knowledgeable guidance on a multitude of products and medical supplies.
The views and opinions expressed on Talkback are not those of the staff, management, or advertisers.
Once again, good morning, everyone. I'm Peter Christian, the fabulous Nick Christensen over there. Good morning, Mr. Nick.
Good morning.
Nick is our producer. He's over there taking care of business. And joining us here in the studio this morning, one of our regular guests, Mr. Bob Seidenschwarz from the Montana World Affairs Council. Good morning, Bob.
Hey, good morning, Peter, Nick, and good morning, Missoula.
You bet. We have a very special guest waiting for us on the phone. He is Dr. David Adler. David Adler is the president of the Alturas Institute, a nonprofit organization created to promote the Constitution, civic education, equal protection of the law, and women's rights. And the recipient of Teaching, Writing, and Civic Awards, Adler has lectured nationally and internationally and published widely on the Constitution, presidential power, and the Bill of Rights. So, Bob, it's all yours.
Dr. Adler, good morning, and thank you very much. I cannot think of too many issues or topics more important and timely than having you here today. And we, of course, just had an election, and there are those who are rejoicing and those who are wailing and gnashing of the teeth. But those will pass. But what I hope is in perpetuity are the importance of our institutions and what they mean and what they stand for. And most importantly right now, as we are now going to be transitioning to a new administration, these institutions are coming to the fore. So I want to say first, welcome to the program. And it would be great if you'd give a little bit of background on how did Dr. David Adler get to the West and this issue and topic in terms of your particular background. Give us a little insight to that, if you would, please.
Well, thank you, Bob, and good morning to you and your team. It's nice to talk with you, and it's a pleasure to be on your show. As you say, this is a perfect time to be able to talk about wide-ranging issues under the Constitution, which is always on the minds of Americans, I think. And so I guess we're lucky that so much has happened in recent times to give us plenty to talk about. I grew up in southwestern Michigan, a little town of 13,000 people on the border of Michigan and Indiana. As it happens, just 10 miles north of Notre Dame's campus. So I grew up under the shadow of the Golden Dome, spent a lot of time on that campus, nearly went there as a student, and then some years ago nearly accepted a faculty position. But even though the universe was calling, I never quite heeded that call. At any rate, I grew up in Michigan and graduated from Michigan State University as a journalism major, and then headed west when I took a position at the Salt Lake Tribune in Salt Lake City, Utah. And after working there for a while, I started sitting in on some classes taught by a constitutional law scholar, an eminent scholar. And it wasn't long before I decided, well, this is what I really want to do. So I quit my job and enrolled in graduate school at the University of Utah, began studying the Constitution intensely, and earned my doctorate from the university, and then moved back to the West to teach at University of Wisconsin. But I had fallen in love with the West during my time in graduate school. I loved the mountains. Coming from Michigan, we saw hills that people referred to as mountains, but of course they were just foothills by Western standards, as you and Peter know. And so when I had the chance to move back west to accept a position at Idaho State University. I jumped at it, and so I've really become a Westerner, transplanted Westerner, you might say. And so I began my career teaching and writing about the Constitution, and I've taught at a variety of universities, lectured a lot nationally and internationally, and so it's a labor of love for me, Bob, because I have a deep passion for the Constitution. I always have. As I grew up, I seemed to have twin interests, one in newspapering and the other in the Constitution. Of course, they overlapped in many ways, and so I'm able to do what I wanted to do. And so after a long career in academia, I decided to further my experience by accepting the opportunity to lead the Alturas Institute, which is a nonprofit educational organization, as you mentioned at the outset of the show, designed to promote the Constitution and civic education. And so, in effect, I've loved taking the Constitution to the streets, and I do this in a variety of ways, including writing weekly newspaper columns on the Constitution, which runs in about a dozen papers in Montana owned by Lee Enterprises and other states as well. And so it's a labor of love, and it's a lot of fun for me.
You bet. And we are up against our first break. And by the way, the phone lines are open. If you have a question for Dr. David Adler, he's here with us to talk with us, but most importantly, you, if you have a quick question, 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. You can also use the KGVO app, and we'll be back with more of the special edition of the Montana World Affairs Council with Bob Seidenschwarz right after this.
As Dennis Bragg with your town square weather, a chance of rain and high valley snow early and then showers through Thursday afternoon. That chance of rain about 50%, so we should see some sun breaks as well. Highs in the upper 40s. Patchy fog developing later in the evening with mostly cloudy skies Friday. An increasing chance of some snow showers at the higher elevations again Friday night. Doesn't look like that will make it into the valleys. That probably is going to change Sunday though with a cold front that may push snow levels down to 3,000 feet. Chilly nights too with lows in the low 20s.
Meet Ed, movie buff, animal lover, safe driver.
5 years of driving an ambulance teaches you a thing or two. If people knew what I know, lives could be saved. When I see a car trying to rush past a turning bus, I get concerned. You see, when big vehicles turn right, they have to swing wide to make the turn. And that's a lesson you don't want to learn the hard way. When trucks and buses turn, let's you and I wait.
It's our roads. It's our safety. Visit www.sharetheroadsafely.gov.
We are back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. We'd love to hear from you during the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. Our guest, along with Bob Seidenschwarz, Dr. David Adler. So let's continue, Bob.
Of course, the audience didn't hear this, but off air, Peter's having a conversation with David, and he was talking about Rob Nadelson. And Peter said he wrote a book, What the Constitution Said and Meant. So throughout our 2 hours that we have with you here today, I'd like our audience and ourselves to be thinking about, as this discussion opens up and moves forward, what did it say and meant? Because that really seems to be somewhat of a contentious issue at times, depending on what side of the fence or how you may view that. So having said that,
just ask the Supreme Court.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Point made. But David, I came to get an introduction to you through an article that is syndicated that I had read in the Missoulian. And this was just before the election, and I'm like, oh, perfect. I've got to reach out to this guy because regardless of what the outcome is, this is going to be and will continue to be a big issue. And the article was, what is the Electoral College still relevant? So if you would start to give us some background on the article, how you came to write that, research, so forth. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Bob. And you're certainly right about the contentious nature of the discussion and debate on the Constitution. And I like Peter's quip, just ask the Supreme Court. So it's always a lot of fun to talk about the origins of the Constitution. And so throughout much of my academic career, I've spent a lot of time writing about the presidency, for example, the scope of presidential power, its limitations, and so forth. And so I've been drawn more recently to this question about the Electoral College, its origins, the rationales for it, and the myths that surround it. And so it occurred to me that I ought to write a series of columns on the Electoral College, and you happen to read one or two, I think, in the Missoulian. And so what I've been doing in this series is to explore why the framers created the Electoral College, as opposed, for example, to the creation of a direct election, what many call the national popular vote system. And what was interesting to learn, Bob and Peter, is that the framers, many of the heavyweights in the Constitutional Convention, actually preferred the idea of a direct election, which may surprise many listeners, but they quickly came up against a problem. And it was a huge problem. And even though they believed in the idea that all votes should count equally in what they called a democratical system, sometimes used synonymously with a republic, and we continue to use those terms interchangeably, they realized that a couple of the problems made it very difficult to implement a direct election, one of which was communication. There was no universal newspaper, no national public radio to adequately inform the voters of the qualifications and credentials of the people who might be seeking the presidency. And that concerned them because without adequate information, voters would be casting their votes in the dark, so to speak. And they feared that this would lead to regionalism, that voters living in the New England states would support a New England candidate, and those in the mid-Atlantic states would support a candidate from their region, and in the South the problem would be the same. And so this would not unify the nation, but in fact it would split the nation given the regionalism. So given the inadequacy of communication, not to mention the inadequacy of transportation, they simply decided this was not a system that they could embrace. Well, that meant that the next most viable system would be one with which they were very familiar. That was sort of a parliamentary system, as we know, where the legislative body, the House of Commons, selects the prime minister. Well, the framers, of course, part of that generations of Americans, I should say, that had lived under English rule, thought that would be the approach, but that quickly represented an impediment because they'd already embraced the separation of powers doctrine. And it simply wouldn't do to have Congress select the president, because that would undermine the idea of the independence of the executive, because a president selected by Congress might always be looking over his shoulder for fear that the Congress would be displeased with what the president would do. And this would create kind of a dependence on the legislative body when they were trying to create an independent executive. And so as they found once that they couldn't use the direct election system, they couldn't use the parliamentary system because of their devotion to separation of powers, that really left them without a clue. And so James Wilson, a delegate from Pennsylvania, whom listeners might know was second in importance only to James Madison as an architect of the Constitution, wrote this was the most difficult issue that the framers faced in that long summer of 1787. They actually took 30 votes over a period of 22 days on the question of the method for electing the president. What they finally came up with was this odd creature, an invention of their own called the Electoral College. And that's what we have today. And it was essentially a third choice reflective of the transportation and communication problems that we faced in 1787. And the point I was making in one of those columns is that the rationales for the creation of the Electoral College no longer obtain. And that renders the Electoral College largely irrelevant in the year 2024 and should bolster the cause for renewals among polls indicate maybe 65 to 70% of the American people who prefer a direct election system. And so if we were to acknowledge that the reasons why we created the Electoral College no longer apply, because obviously we have no impediments to communication, as listeners would acknowledge, sometimes we know more about presidential candidates than we care to know. And so we don't have those problems that prevented the creation of the direct election. And so my contention is that lacking that relevance, combined with an essential point, namely, in America, we say that every vote should be equal. No man's vote should count more than another man's vote. And so in the spirit of political equality, which is the foundation for America, and in the spirit of one man, one vote, or we should say one person, one vote, it's time, I think, to abolish the Electoral College and move toward a system that it's much more representative and reflective of where America is in 2024.
All right. We are up against another break. Phone lines are open. Agree or disagree. This is why Dr. Adler's here with us. He's got a very powerful argument there. 721-1290 is our number. 1-800-568-5309. We'd love to hear from you and get you on the air and talk with Dr. Adler. He'll be on with us till 10 o'clock this morning, along with Bob Seidenschwarz. We'll be back after this.
It's your last chance. Menard's 11% rebate ends soon. Wrap up those big projects before the holidays. Weatherproof in style with new Mastercraft exterior doors. Customize your kitchen with Clearview cabinetry. It's time to pick up those new appliances or start your big garage project. Don't miss out. The 11% rebate ends Thanksgiving. Stores closed Thanksgiving Day. 11% mail-in rebate is a merchandise credit check. Good on future in-store purchases. See Menards.com for details.
Save big money at Menards.
Apply. When your car is making a strange noise, no matter what it is, you can't just pretend it's not happening.
That's an interesting sound.
It's like your mental health. If you're struggling and feeling overwhelmed, it's important to do something about it. It can be as simple as talking to someone or just taking a deep, calming breath to ground yourself. Because once you start to address the problem, you can go so much further. The Huntsman Mental Health Institute and the Ad Council have resources available for you at loveyourmindtoday.org.
If you love them enough to listen to them practice the same song on tuba,
please be done.
Over and over and over and over and over, then surely you'll check NHTSA.gov/the right seat to make sure they're correctly buckled in the back seat.
Sounds good, honey.
Check today at NHTSA.gov/the right seat. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Hey, welcome back to Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. 1-800-568-5309. And let's see, joining us on the phone right now, Dr. David Adler with the Alturas Institute. He's in Idaho, and just not far, a hop, skip, and a jump across the Rockies. And Bob Seidenschwarz here is in the studio with us. And we do have callers. We'd like to get them on as quickly as we can, Dr. Adler. So, Dave, let's get Mark on the line. Mark, good morning. You're on with Dr. Adler. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Dr. Adler. Thanks for being here today. A couple of questions. First of all, in this survey that was taken, where 70-some% of the population want to do away with Electoral College, I'd be curious to see the breakdown of that. How much of that is New York, California, and the other coastal cities, and how much of that are the rural states? I'll bet you the average in the rural states where there's less population is the percentage of those that are not in favor of doing away with Electoral College would be higher. The second question is, aren't we the United States of America? This means that each state has equal representation in the process. And, quite honestly, if you were to do this, I think the reason that they did put in the Electoral College originally was to keep the states from trying to, break up the union. Anyway, I'll listen to you. Thank you online if I can, please.
Yes, okay. Go ahead, Doctor, please.
Well, thank you. And Mark asked a number of very, very good questions, excellent questions that probe the rationales for the Electoral College and the impact on our nation today. So the first thing I would note is that the popularity of the idea of a direct popular vote, direct election, has grown in recent years, but it's been pretty strong for 50 years. Listeners will be interested to know that back in 1969, the House of Representatives actually approved a proposal to amend the Constitution to abolish the Electoral College. When it went to the Senate, then the Senate witnessed a filibuster, and so that killed the bill. But ever since then, there has been a clamor for a direct popular vote. Of course, 5 times in our history, a presidential candidate who's won the popular vote did not win the Electoral College and thus was denied the opportunity to serve in the White House, thus essentially sending the person who was not the overwhelming choice of the American people to hold the nation's highest office. Now, Mark raises excellent questions. The reality here is that in the Constitutional Convention, James Madison said we don't have to fear that small states will be overwhelmed by large states, because most of the contentious points were between North and South states, and historically that's been the case. And I raise that because many advocates of the Electoral College argue that small states would be overwhelmed through a direct popular vote. But the reality is that there's nothing that unifies voters within small states as opposed to large states. It's another way of saying there is a broad diversity of views in all the small states, just as there are in the large states, including, for example, New England states, which tend to be more liberal. The smaller states in the plain states, like Montana and the Dakotas, more conservative, and the same might be said of the small western states. And so we don't find congressional representatives voting as a bloc in Congress to protect the interests of small states compared to large states, because there's not an identifiable, unified core group of similar values or interests. And so that undercuts the ideas that small states need protection. And Mark asked a very good question about the breakdown from coast to coast. And surprisingly, we would find many supporters of the direct election system across the country. It is true that some rural residents prefer the Electoral College, but that should not be based on the idea that there is a need to protect small states, because, of course, the interest among rural voters can change from, say, Vermont to Montana or New Hampshire to Idaho. And so one of the issues that we have to deal with, first of all, is to help people understand that the small states don't need representation through the Electoral College. What we have to recognize is that the Electoral College really disserves the idea of political equality. And as everybody knows, the candidates tend to focus on 6 or 7 battleground states at the expense of campaigning in other states across the country. And so one side effect of the Electoral College is out here in the West or in the Plain states, we're ignored. We don't get any attention. If we lived in Ohio or Pennsylvania, Michigan, and so forth, we would get plenty of attention. So a direct popular vote would bring everybody into the equation. Everybody's vote would count equally. And so everybody could have an impact on the election outcome.
Sounds good. All right, we're going to come.
I would say,
Mark, we're up against a break. Thanks for the call. We're going to come right back. We have Joanne, Rick, and Wingnut all waiting to visit with Dr. David Adler, who's joining us from the Alturas Institute in Idaho, talking about the Constitution and right now about the Electoral College. We'll continue. Hopefully, get your phone calls when we come back after this.
Looking for a delicious...
Dennis Bragg with your town square weather. A chance of rain and high valley snow early and then showers through Thursday afternoon. That chance of rain about 50%, so we should see some sun breaks as well. Highs in the upper 40s. Patchy fog developing later in the evening with mostly cloudy skies Friday. An increasing chance of some snow showers at the higher elevations again Friday night. Doesn't look like that will make it into the valleys. That probably is going to change Sunday though with a cold front that may push snow levels down to 3,000 feet. Chilly nights too with lows in the low 20s.
We are back. This is Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. 1-800-568-5309. By the way, if you don't already have the KGVO app, I encourage you to go to the App Store, download that, and that way, when you have the app, first of all, you can listen to KGVO anywhere in the world because it's digital. And then there's also a Message Us button on there, and that will enable you to send messages during Talkback if you can't get through on the phone. So we encourage you to take care of that. We continue now with our conversation with Dr. David Adler and Bob Seidenschwarz, and Joanne is waiting next. Joanne, good morning. What's your question for Dr. Adler? Go ahead, please.
Well, I don't really have a question. I just have a comment that Mark is actually very right, and where he's saying that the small states are not, because they're mingled, the population between left and right. But the problem is it's the same problem. It's the big cities. We can't even outvote San Francisco. Our whole state will be negated by San Francisco or any other big city. So you need the combination of all of the small states in order to get the point through, because even our state is divided. Missoula and Bozeman, they don't vote like the whole eastern part of Montana, but there are more when it's spread out. And that's my point, is that to go changing it is going to leave us, we might not even bother to go to the elections because we don't have a vote.
All right,
that's
interesting.
All I got to say.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead,
Right.
Bob.
Thank you for the comment. It just, as I'm listening to it, it just occurs to me that our recent election, Trump wins the popular vote.
Right.
He also won electoral states, as a result of winning that vote in those states, which in some cases was very much a rural state or a great deal of them. But he also won it in some of the larger states in terms of where we've seen population shifts. Georgia being an example, a conservative red state for decades.
Yeah.
And then we've seen that population demographic shift of Yankees moving on down to the south, and people moving into these different regions of the country. So this is a very fluid situation, to David's point. And can you please comment on that in conjunction with what the caller just had said, David?
Yes, thank you very much, Bob. Well, those are excellent points that Joanne raised. And so first of all, we'd want to say that in the Constitutional Convention, James Madison, the father of the Constitution, preferred the direct election because he wanted every vote to count the same. He thought that was the most representative, democratic way of honoring the will of the people, the right of the people to choose their government. And so to diminish the vote of somebody like my Republican friends in California, in a very democratic state, is to deny them the opportunity to have a direct impact on the outcome of the election. So if we adhere to the fundamental principle of political equality, then everybody's vote counts the same, whether they are a conservative in Michigan and they can participate in the majority as they did in this last election, but they move to a blue state such as Colorado, and suddenly their vote doesn't count the same, raises real important questions about equality or what we might call loosely equal justice. And so the idea is to spread out the votes, give everybody a chance to have an equal impact. And what Joanne's good points represent is there a diverse interest, even within Montana, between Helena and Bozeman and Missoula and all over the state. And so because we have diversity of issues within a state, we shouldn't assume that a state is necessarily representative of the views of all the people. In fact, James Wilson, whom I mentioned, a leading delegate from Pennsylvania, actually said in the Constitutional Convention, can we forget for whom we are forming a government? Is it for men or for the imaginary beings called states? He was an advocate for direct election. He wanted the people to be represented. And so given the diversity of interests within small states, it means that urban versus rural, or poor people versus wealthy people, those kind of financial struggles, educated versus relatively uneducated, certain agricultural interests pitted against other agricultural interests. If, in fact, we give all the votes of a state to one candidate, the winner of the popular vote, it means those others are essentially blocked out, almost disenfranchised. And so the idea of the direct election is to make every vote count equally.
All right, and with that, we're up against another break, and the phone lines are just going crazy. They're lighting up. We have Rick, Mr. Wingnut, Jeff, Doug, Jerry, and another line is ringing. So we're going to come right back with Dr. David Adler and Bob Seidenschwarz with the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio right after this quick timeout.
In Montana.
With KGRZ Sports, I'm Ace Sauerwein with your daily update, brought to you by Republic Services. The Montana Grizzlies dropped in Knoxville 92-57 against the Tennessee Volunteers, but what a night it was for Money Williams.
Williams splits a double team, attacks the rim, gets it to go and one. And Money Williams has scored 22 points. That's a new record against SEC foes. Williams splits a double team, attacks the rim, gets it to go and one. And Money Williams has scored 22 points. That's a new record against SEC foes.
Money scores a new career high, 30 points in the loss against the Volunteers. The Grizzly men's basketball team will take on Utah State this Monday at 7 o'clock. Lady Grizz basketball, they resume play tonight against Cal Poly, 8 o'clock tip at home. That's a look at sports. I'm Ace Sauerwein.
Need to replace your Social Security card? In most states, you can request one online with a My Social Security account. A My Social Security account gives you secure access to your personal earnings history and benefit status. You can also get a proof of income letter, estimate and apply for benefits, and more. Save time. Go online. Open a My Social Security account at ssa.gov/myaccount. Social Security. Securing today and tomorrow.
Produced at U.S. taxpayer expense.
We are back. This is Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. 1-800-568-5309. Bob Seidenschwarz joining us, the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. Dr. David Adler's with the Alturas Institute in Idaho. And we're talking about the election, the Constitution, the Electoral College, and the phones have just been going crazy. So let's just continue. And I believe Rick is waiting on the line right now. Rick, good morning. What's your question for Dr. Adler? Go ahead, please.
I basically have two questions. There's a suggestion going around right now that Biden step down so Kamala can have a few months as being president, and that would fulfill the left's wish of a woman in the highest office in the land. And is there any constitutional things that bar that from happening? Because they've had plenty of time to get Biden out of office due to diminished health. And the second question is another Kamala. Is there anything in the Constitution that prevents a person from being coronated as a candidate to run for office, as Kamala was? And it was done by manipulation of partisan politics. And that's my two questions, and I'd like you to not hang up on me before he answers.
Okay, because I know you, yeah. All right, real quick. So, yeah, thanks. Go ahead. Dr. Adler, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I appreciate those two fine questions. The first point is that under the Constitution, if President Biden were to resign, to step down, then as vice president, Kamala Harris would automatically become the president of the United States until January 20. So that's eminently doable. Whether there's any consideration or even any discussion underway is something that we're not privy to. The second good point about Biden stepping down when he did, or at least announcing that he was not going to seek re-election, which raised questions about the process by which the Democratic Party would choose his successor. And that was the subject of wide-ranging discussion. Some wanted an open primary. Others wanted a quick successor, as it were, announced. And, of course, that's left to each individual party. And so parties have the opportunity under their own rules to decide how a successor nominee is decided. In my own view, it would have been more healthy for the Democratic Party if President Biden had announced much sooner that he was not going to seek re-election, and there would have been time for a primary, however truncated that primary process would have been. And who knows, maybe the vice president, Kamala Harris, would have been the eventual winner. Maybe not. We'll never know. So I appreciate those questions.
All right, let's get Mr. Wingnut on the line. Mr. Wingnut, good morning. You're on with David Adler. Go ahead, please.
Well, good morning. Admittedly, this all came kind of as a surprise, so all my comments are kind of off the top of my head, observations. The United States isn't just an amalgamation of individual citizens. It was set up as a confederation of states, and recognizing that people in different states or regions had distinctly different values and views and whatnot. So I don't think that just a look at it as a homogenous amalgamation across the country is accurate. And the evidence for this is if we look at a map of red states and blue states, and this goes towards your big state, little state comment. If we look at a map of the red and the blue states, we see distinct patterns that the populous blue states are on the coast, and the red states tend to be in the middle of the country. So there is a distinct. It's not each state is just a wide. There's a distinct difference between the states. So I'm going to propose another alternative. Why don't we just have one vote, one state, or one state, one vote? The citizens within that state, they can all vote how they want to in your system of one person, one vote. And since they belong to that state and have chosen to belong to that state, and we all the confederations of state, then when it comes down to it, one state, one vote.
All right. All right. Thanks for the call. All right, Dr. Adler, I've got some problems with that one myself, but go ahead, please.
Well, that's a creative suggestion for sure. I think that we want to remember that the country was created to represent the people wherever they live, and that it wasn't based on a system that if you live in a particular state, you are doomed to have your vote ignored by the majority in that particular state. That goes back to James Wilson's comments that we formed the Constitution not for the states, but for the people. The states are just geographical jurisdictions. And the reality is that not everybody who lives in Montana or any other state shares the same interest. There's not a monolithic block of interest. I'm sure there are disputes, for example, between farmers and ranchers, between people who live in larger cities in Montana and smaller cities. Some people are very wealthy. We've all watched Yellowstone, and some people struggle financially. So the fact is, states, even as small as Montana and Wyoming and Idaho, have diverse interests, and the idea is to give everybody an equal opportunity to affect the outcome of the election for the nation's highest office. And we want to remember that, of course, every other office in our country, from city councils to mayoral races to county commissions to legislative seats to governor races, are all based on one person, one vote. And so this is an odd duck, and the reasons for the creation of the Electoral College no longer obtain in the United States, because we obviously don't have the kind of insuperable communication and transportation problems that defeated the idea for a direct election in the Constitutional Convention.
All right, let's tell you what, we're a minute away from a break here, so I want to be able to give Jeff plenty of time to ask his question and get the answer. We'll take our quick break, and when we come right back, we have Jeff, Dave, and Catherine all waiting to visit with Dr. David Adler from the Alturas Institute right after this.
How do you make everyone's favorite buffet even better? How do you make the country's best chicken even more exciting? How do you make Thursday the best night ever? Wing night at Pizza Ranch. Boneless and traditional, a variety of sauces, all the wings you want, plus all your other buffet favorites. The country's best wing night is here, taking flight Thursday nights on the buffet, only at Pizza Ranch. Pizza Ranch, everyone's favorite buffet.
Hey, welcome back to Talk Back. Let's jump right back in. Dr. David Adler, very, very generously taking a lot of calls here this morning, and let's get Jeff on the line. Jeff, good morning. You're on with Dr. Adler. Go ahead, please.
Hey, good morning. I am no constitutional scholar. However, I've observed what I can through the years, and I believe you've made an assertion, Dr. Adler, that actually kind of avoids an issue, and that's the fact that federalism and the concept of federalism threaded itself throughout the Constitutional Convention, and that you've asserted that the states are artificial creations and that individuals are the right way to do this, but that was not something that was held by the majority of the attendees to the Constitutional Convention. That and I think a lot of us Montanans would not take umbrage, but would disagree with you that Montana is an artificial construct. I understand that the borders are artificially assigned and things like that, but we have an identity as Montanans that we are very proud of and that we guard fairly jealously. And the Electoral College was a mechanism to devise the least bad method of electing a president. There are disadvantages to the popular vote, and folks have talked about that particularly in the current environment, if you focus on large population centers, Montana would be overlooked even more than it is now, and that the Electoral College was an effort to give smaller states as much power as possible to avoid being that sheep that's eyeing the two wolves who are deciding what's for dinner. You know, we have an ability to not make our voice known as strongly as New York or California, but because we have two senators like they do, we have a larger voice with the Electoral College than we would with a popular vote. And I think that's what's missing, is that the idea of retaining federalism. I've seen a desire to nibble away at the idea of federalism with more and more U.S. government agencies and involvement, encroachment into our lives. And this seems to be, in my mind, just another one where we're trying to take powers away from the states and consequently liberty from individuals. So, thanks.
All right. Thanks for the call, Jeff. Dr. Adler.
Thank you. Well, Jeff raises a bunch of fascinating points. I appreciate the call. If I moved quickly through several of these, the first thing I would say is that when the framers discussed the Electoral College, they did not discuss it as a mechanism to protect federalism. They understood that the protection of federalism was adequately served through representation in Congress, through the House and the Senate. So from their perspective, the Electoral College did not serve the interest of federalism. A second point to note, and Jeff's certainly right in saying he loves his state, and we in Montanans have an identity. But the reality is that, remember, Montanans are capable of electing in the same election cycle a Democrat, sending a Democrat to Helena, and a Republican to Washington. So that suggests a diversity of interests, changing interests, as it were, and values change, interests change from election to election, given economic issues and other matters. And it reminds me, of course, that what we do in this nation is that we take account of changing attitudes and values and interests, and we always have, as we've amended the Constitution now 27 times to reflect those changing values. So, as everybody knows, for example, at the Constitutional Convention and the early years of the Republic and for many years afterward, there was no interest in granting the right to vote to black Americans. We remedied that with the 15th Amendment. Years later, we took the opportunity to remedy the failure to grant women the right to vote. Years later, we extended the franchise to 18-year-olds. So values change; they aren't fixed in stone. And within states, as Madison said, as Wilson said, as Ben Franklin said, the reality is the states have different interests, just as the large states do. And Just Good Questions point up the need to point out that the framers recognized that there were many different interests within large states as well. So the changing interests and values is what leads us to the question of how to give effect to every Montanan, every American from coast to coast. The Electoral College takes away that opportunity by violating the principle of political equality. And if we want to deny the principle of political equality, then we're fundamentally denying the idea of popular sovereignty, that every person deserves to be represented and have a right to choose their elected officials, including highest office in the land.
Okay, Dave, well, let's try to get one more quick call in, even if we have to answer it after the break. But Dave has been waiting. Dave, what's your question for Dr. Adler? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, first of all, I agree with you. 200,000 votes changed. If that hadn't changed in this last election, Trump would have lost. And that would have not been fair. I mean, he won the popular vote. 200,000 votes should not make the difference in who is president. And I am tired. I'm tired of trying to vote for Electoral College. We don't vote for president specifically. We vote for Electoral College, and then they decide to do what we hope they're going to do. And I think that should change.
All right, Dave, thanks for the call. Dr. Adler, we got about 2 minutes. Go ahead, please. About a minute and a half.
Great. Well, I like that call from Dave very much. The reality here is that what we're seeking is a system that best represents the views of all Americans across the country. And right now, people who are Republicans in Democratic states are essentially excluded. Similarly, Democrats who live in red states are essentially excluded. And we would say, why should their vote be excluded? Why not count everybody's vote equally? And Dave raises the specter of the possibility of rogue electors who might not, in fact, adequately reflect or fairly reflect the outcome of the vote within the state. That's happened 16 or 18 times in our country. Not many, but it's always a possibility. And the reality is, in this election, which is not a landslide election, Donald Trump won a convincing election, but landslide victories are 1936, FDR winning 62% of the vote, or Ronald Reagan winning by a huge margin in 1980. Those are landslide victories. This was narrow. In fact, if the vote had changed by less than 1% in the blue wall states, Kamala Harris would have won. That was flipping just one out of every 100 voters, and there would be a different president. So the popular vote is the more equal, more representative way to measure the views of the American voters.
And with that, we are up against our hard break here at the top of the hour. But we have another hour yet to come with Dr. Adler. We deeply appreciate him spending 2 hours of his very valuable time with us here on Talkback. And so we will continue after the top of the hour and with Bob and Dr. Adler. So stay with us.
This is Talkback, 721-1290 or 1-800-568-5309.
This is Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 98.3 FM. KGVO.
Missoula's news and weather station.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. It's hour number 2 of Talkback for this Thursday, November 14th. Talkback this morning brought to you by 123 Seamless Gutters. Family owned and operated with gutter installations, repairs, and more at 406-240-2669, protecting the foundation of your future. Harrington Surgical Supply, where appointments are preferred for mastectomy fittings and custom compressions, but walk-ins are always welcome. Also brought to you by Y West Storage. They're out at the Y on Two Smokes Way. If you need storage, here's their number, 5100590, because at Y West, they're making room for you. And by Phillips Janitorial, with both cleaning for your home and your business. No job too big or small for Phillips, 406-260-6617.
The views and opinions expressed on Talkback are not those of the staff, management, or advertisers.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Good to have you along. Nick Christensen producing Talkback right over there. Good morning, Mr. Nick. Thank you for all you're doing. And Bob Seidenschwarz joining us here in the studio this morning with the Montana World Affairs Council. And our guest on the phone is Dr. David Adler with the Alturas Institute. So, Bob, I want to kick things off and maybe do a little introduction before we get back into calls.
That was a great hour, and thank you. David, I'm going to ask that we maybe shift gears here just slightly, but staying with the Constitution and your expertise, let's move this a little bit to two areas right now that are of utmost importance, no doubt contentious. And what we're going to have you do is give us some insight as to the legalities vis-a-vis the Constitution. And what I'm describing is immigration and deportation and recess appointments. So let's start with the issue of the immigration and deportation as far as what can or cannot be done as the Constitution and our laws are currently written. So just kind of a gentle little topic to move into the next hour. Go ahead, David.
Sure. Thank you, Bob. Well, that certainly was a vital issue in this campaign. A lot of supporters of President-elect Donald Trump indicated that the immigration issue was the most important to them. And this has everything to do with the laws governing the entrance into our country by people from other country. And immigration debates, of course, have been hot-button issues for many, many years. We all know that. And we know that both parties have struggled to try to formulate good policies and laws to promote our interests. What we want, of course, is to have a nation in which people enter the country legally. That's number one. Number two, the question is how to create a smooth system to process people coming into the country. And number three is how to at least limit the number of people who are crossing illegally. And so all of those issues form a very contentious debate. What is the front burner issue right now, as everybody recognizes, is the campaign proposal now apparently being implemented by President-elect Trump and his team to round up those who are in the country illegally, that is, who are undocumented aliens. And we're hearing now from his prospective border czar, Mr. Homan, that a massive deportation plan is underway to create camps or around large cities ranging from New York and Washington to Chicago to Denver, where those who will be rounded up in what's known as the massive deportation plan will be rounded up and then deported, although we're not getting any details. And without details, it's hard to give an appraisal of the proposal. And intermixed with all this, of course, is a recognition that many people come to this country to seek a better way of life. They are fleeing countries in which they've been politically or religiously persecuted. People have many, many reasons. And of course, there are strong humanitarian, compelling arguments for accepting as many people as we possibly can and to treat people as human beings and not in a cruel fashion. People should remember, and I think many voters do, that it was just last spring that the conservatives in the Senate had cobbled together an immigration bill led by Senator Langford of Oklahoma, a deep red state, that better served the interest of Republicans than Democrats. Democratic senators signed on to it, and President Joe Biden said he would support it, despite the fact that it didn't serve Democratic interests as much as it served Republican interests. It's at that point that Donald Trump called the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and said, kill the bill because I want it as a campaign issue. Well, it served him well in the campaign, but it disserved the interests of the nation because we had the kind of bill that would have secured the border, created more immigration judges, added more agents to process those wanting to come in the country. And so really, while it served Trump's own personal self-interest, it did not serve the interest of the country. Now we'll wait to see what happens with the deportation plan.
David, we're going to have to go to a break here. So when we come back, I've got a question that's very important to moving forward with this discussion. So when we come back for the break, I'll ask that to you.
And we have Catherine, Wingnut, Tom, and Harry all waiting to visit with you. We're going to come right back with Bob's question and our callers when we return right after this.
Call 123 Seamless.
With KGRZ Sports, I'm Ace Sauerwein with your daily update, brought to you by Republic Services. The Montana Grizzlies dropped in Knoxville 92-57 against the Tennessee Volunteers, but what a night it was for Money Williams.
Williams splits a double team, attacks the rim, gets it to go and one. And Money Williams has scored 22 points. That's a new record against SEC foes. Williams splits a double team, attacks the rim, gets it to go and one. And Money Williams has scored 22 points. That's a new record against SEC foes.
Money scores a new career high, 30 points in the loss against the Volunteers. The Grizzly men's basketball team will take on Utah State this Monday at 7 o'clock. Lady Grizz basketball, they resume play tonight against Cal Poly, 8 o'clock tip at home. That's a look at sports. I'm Ace Sauerwein.
Dennis Bragg with your Town Square weather. A chance of rain and high valley snow early and then showers through Thursday afternoon. That chance of rain about 50%, so we should see some sun breaks as well. Highs in the upper 40s. Patchy fog developing later in the evening with mostly cloudy skies Friday. An increasing chance of some snow showers at the higher elevations again Friday night. Doesn't look like that will make it into the valleys. That probably is going to change Sunday though with a cold front that may push snow levels down to 3,000 feet. Chilly nights too with lows in the low 20s.
Okay, we're back on Talkback. Bob has one more quick question for Dr. Adler, and then we'll go to the phones.
For purposes of the discussion, there are illegals and then there are illegals. What I mean by that is that if you come into a port of entry and you come to make application for your claim for asylum, that is a process we know may take after you've gone through that. Then you're released into the country. Technically, are you still not considered an illegal immigrant or illegal alien, even though you've come through the port, as opposed to coming in another way, swimming across a river, sneaking through a tunnel, whatever the case may be, where we haven't even had you come to a port to apply for asylum. Now, asylum also has very specific qualifications to determine whether you, when your case is up for review, will be accepted and allowed into the country to follow that path, or your asylum case is rejected, ergo you have to return to country of origin or whatever the case may be. So I believe this is an important distinction to help us understand a term that I believe we tend to, cobble together in one big brush.
Well, I think that's a very fine point. I'm glad you raised that. And technically, until you've been approved through the process, and it's a lengthy process, you are not technically a legal immigrant. And I think what's happened during the campaign is that candidates have painted a picture of people, to use their language, swarming across the border, swimming across the Rio Grande, climbing fences. And the reality is that we have a well-defined system. The problem is one of implementing it in an efficient way, because we don't have enough border agents, we don't have enough immigration judges, we don't have enough staff. And that's what this bill last spring attempted to remedy. And it had the concurrence of both Republicans and Democrats, and it represented the first full comprehensive immigration bill in many, many years. And so it was extremely disappointing that candidate Trump wanted it killed to better serve his own campaign interests at the expense of our country.
So, David, and I know we got the calls, but how does ICE then make the distinction when they're rounding up people to say that you're here, you've gone through the process, but you haven't had your hearing versus somebody that swam across the river? Is there data or information to make those distinctions?
No, I don't think they can fairly distinguish those folks, Bob, and that's what's really disappointing. And I'm sure there are going to be a lot of arbitrary decisions made. We're going to find that if they do proceed with that dragnet, there are going to be a lot of people who are, in fact, U.S. citizens who are in that dragnet because of the color of their skin. We're not talking about sweeping up people from European countries or other nations. We're talking about sweeping up people who come from nations south of our border.
Okay, let's get right to the phones and say good morning to Catherine. Thank you for holding. You're on with Dr. Adler. Go ahead, please.
Okay, all right. Boy, lots here. One of the core properties I've always thought was of the Constitution was the idea of a three-legged stool, i.e. dividing up responsibilities and power between the executive, legislative, and individual. That kind of goes from a top down, actually, all throughout our governmental system. The powers divided between the individual and the state and the national. The 17th Amendment took away one leg, the Senate, and turned the Senate into a more universal body, not necessarily representing state interests. That causes a problem in my mind. Direct popular vote would increase the power of urban areas over rural, tyranny of the majority over the minority, and Plato suggests that democracy, direct democracy, is one of the stages of the late stages of the decline of the state, because it always leads to tyrants. And one of my examples is people in New York could care less about Montana agriculture and rural needs. Witness the introduction of the idea in the public conversation, which is in the fringes, by the way, of getting rid of farms, and that is being discussed on the fringes of the public conversation. And that's how ideas spread from those who have no knowledge. And as far as illegal immigration goes, the overriding problem is no vetting of who is coming in, and then the use of taxpayer money to pay for housing and food and other incidentals, as opposed to previous waves of immigrants who had to fend for themselves, which is how it should be done. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for the call, Catherine. Okay, Dr. Adler.
Well, there are a lot of interesting points raised there. If we take the first point first, the caller is certainly correct that our constitutional system divides powers among the three branches of government, and then powers are divided between the national government and the states, and of course that individuals have rights that are protected by the Bill of Rights as applied to both national and state government. So that's a nice civics understanding. Of course, it's clear that the Congress comes first. It's the most important branch, as James Madison pointed out. In a republic, the legislature comes first because it's the most representative branch of government, and that's why Congress has a much longer list of powers under Article 1 of the Constitution. The powers of the presidency under Article 2 are sharply limited, and that reflects the desire to elevate Congress over the president. And the caller mentions a sweeping host of policy issues. The reality here is that what we're talking about is a system in which all people are represented chiefly by their representatives in Congress. That's what the framers had in mind as the best way to promote federalism, which is an integral part of our system, to be sure. But they thought that would be secured by representatives in the House and the Senate. They did not discuss the Electoral College as a means to promote the interest of federalism. As for farmers and ranchers in different states, some interests will be shared. Of course, historically, ranchers and farmers have been pitted against one another. And so it's not the case, and nor is it the case that all agricultural interests are the same. All agricultural interests are often competing for subsidies from the government. You know, whether you're growing sugar beets or hay or whatever, the issues may vary because of competition for limited funds. So we don't have a system in which we would say that all members of the agricultural community share the same values and interests, nor would we say that of all ranchers. And the reality is that if, in fact, the Electoral College represented a system of government in which all state representatives would work together to promote the interests of small states, that means they would vote the same on those issues, but they don't. They don't do that because of different interests in various states, whether large or small. The other thing that we could note, another way to look at this, is that while some callers, and like many across the country, believe that there are local interests that should be represented, we don't have presidents appealing to local interests. That's almost never done. In fact, in the Constitutional Convention, James Madison, among others, says we don't want candidates appealing to local considerations. Those should be reflected in congressional representatives. And the behavior of presidential candidates over time has indicated that they don't appeal to local interests. And that accords, as I say, with the campaign behavior of the framers' expectations. And the other problem, of course, is, or the other way to demonstrate this, I should say, is that historically presidential candidates do not visit the small states. It's rare to get any kind of a visit, and so they're focusing all their time on a few key battleground states to the exclusion of the interest of voters out here in the West and in the Plain states. If we had a direct popular vote, then candidates would go to all the states trying to look for their voters through very sophisticated means. They would know where they could find voters that might be warm to their views, or voters that would be persuadable. Like hunters, they would go where the ducks are. But right now, we don't get that kind of attention. We're overlooked. And nothing's going to change unless we move to the direct popular vote.
We're going to come. Right back. 721-1290 is our number. 1-800-568-5309. And we have Tom, Harry, and Ed, and several others who want to jump in the conversation. This is great. Citizen participation, or class participation, I guess we might call it. With Dr. David Adler, we'll return right after this quick timeout.
Montana State News Network.
I'm Dennis Bragg. Montana Senator Steve Daines isn't giving up in his crusade to force the Washington Commanders to restore at least some recognition of the club's legacy Redskins logo, which happens to feature the likeness of a Blackfeet chief. Daines took to the Senate floor yesterday to defend his bill, which calls upon the Commanders and the National Football League to find a way to honor the image of Chief Two Guns White Calf, which was created by Blackfeet leader Blackie Wetzel. Daines is encouraged the team has indicated some concessions.
It's also my understanding the Commanders are continuing to have good faith conversations with the Wetzel family on potentially allowing a new foundation to be created to use the iconic logo to draw attention to critical issues facing Indian country.
The bill is scheduled for markup next week. State officials say nearly half of the 700 employees laid off by the Sibanye-Stillwater mine are interested in receiving post-layoff help, and that process started this week as the company formally made the layoffs weeks after announcing the shutdown because of poor market conditions. More than 4 representatives from the Department of Labor have been meeting with employees at the Stillwater Civic Center as part of a rapid response event that will wrap up today, in addition to offering information about benefits, retraining, and even helping miners start their own business. The sessions are also extending help to businesses impacted by the shutdown. Governor Greg Gianforte says the state can afford a proposal to trim state income taxes by record levels, a plan in his new budget that could save taxpayers $850 million. The newly reelected governor pitched the cut yesterday, aiming to drop the rate from 5.9% to 4.9% over the next 2 years.
We have more structural money. If this is our spending curve, this is our revenue curve. This difference is what we're using to buy down the rates. Okay, so it's really different for property taxes versus income taxes.
Gianforte says controlled spending and a robust economy make the cut possible. This is the Montana State News Network.
If I could be you.
And you could be me for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Here's a fun fact for you. The average chameleon can point their eyes in 2 different directions. On the other hand, the average human can't. So unless you're a chameleon, there's absolutely no way you can focus on texting and driving at the same time. So don't do it. Unless you're a chameleon.
Visit StopTextsStopWrecks.org. A message brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Project Yellow Light, and the Ad Council.
We are back on Talkback. Peter Christian here, Nick Christensen being very busy over there producing Talkback, taking lots of calls this morning. And joining us on the phone is Dr. David Adler with the Alturas Institute. And so let's jump right back in and get Tom on the line. Tom, good morning, sir. You are on with Dr. Adler. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning, gentlemen. Well, the first thing is it's pretty great that this is not going to happen, so we don't have to worry about that. And then on the immigration front, talking about getting more immigration judges and all this stuff, 1.3 million people that applied for asylum have already gone to court and have been denied to stay in the United States, and they're not leaving, and they won't leave. So, if you want Montana to be run by Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, just go for the popular vote. And last but not least is the fact that 9 or 10 days after the election, California is still counting their votes. Who knows where they're finding them, in dumpsters, postmarks that may be days after the election. Until we have integrity from states like California and New York, this is going nowhere. So I'd just like to get this gentleman's opinion.
All right. Thanks for the call. Go ahead, Dr. Adler.
Thank you. Well, I hear that litany of grievances very clearly. The one point that I'd like to note is, of course, that Donald Trump won the popular vote this last time. And so the popular vote system wouldn't mean, of course, that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumers of the world are going to run the country. Rather, what it reflects is the will of the sovereign people. I think everybody, including the caller, would agree that every vote should count, and every vote should count equally. If they're not going to be counted equally, then on the basis of what system are we going to defend the unequal weighting of votes? And would that mean that the caller would abandon or surrender his right to vote as opposed to people in other states? I think that's doubtful. And so what we want is a system in which all votes are counted equally. And the fact that Donald Trump won the popular vote this time around means that people in San Francisco and other cities in California aren't going to be able to dominate the popular vote, as it's sometimes feared. Their votes will carry a lot of weight, but so too will all the Republicans in California, just like the Democrats will.
Okay, let's get Harry on the line next. Harry's been waiting the longest. Harry, thank you for your patience. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, good morning, gentlemen. First off, I agree with you. I have just a hunch that the vast majority of the people who are vehemently agree with the Electoral College are Republicans, because in the modern day, the people who have won the Electoral College but lost the popular vote were Republicans. Say if the next president is a Democrat who wins the Electoral College vote and loses the popular vote, I think that the tune would change. All of a sudden, oh, no, we got to get rid of it. And in the same vein, I think something else, I think that we're going to hear a whole lot of push for to get rid of the filibuster in the Congress and Senate now, and I think Trump will be pushing for that too. But as an alternative to getting rid of the Electoral Colleges, what if it wouldn't be as representative, but at least it'd give some people a little more representative if they had states instead of giving winner take all, would give the percentage. Say in Montana, we only have 4 votes, but if the person will have to win more than 75% to get them all, other than that, if they got a little above 50, they'd get 3, and the other one would get 1. But that's an alternative. I mean, you would probably have to do it state by state, but I would think that would be at least a little bit more representative. And as for you brought up a couple of points, but illegal immigrants, I'm wondering, can they? Because if a person is applying for asylum, can the federal government just ignore that and just kick them out? Or I know the law says they are supposed to have a hearing to determine whether they qualify. But I'm wondering, could they just bypass that altogether? Right now, and also I want to hear more about the appointments on what you brought up.
The recess appointments.
Yeah, recess appointments.
Yeah, we're going to get to that, Harry.
And we're going to tackle all those issues when we come back from the break. And Harry, you've raised some excellent points. We're going to come right back. Dr. Adler's written them all down, and we'll get to them as quickly as we can. Ed, Lisa, and Cody are all waiting to visit with you, Dr. Adler. So, you're winning a popularity contest today. We're going to come right back after this timeout. In the world of Going Talk Back, and Dr. David Adler joining us from the Alturas Institute with the Montana World Affairs Council, and Bob Seidenschwarz. And Harry brought up an excellent point with recess appointments, which was part of your plan anyway.
It's a big deal right now. So give us an understanding of what it means, and given some of the potential appointments that are being considered, expand upon that a little bit, David.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciated the questions, many good questions from Harry. The recess appointment issue is now a front burner issue because listeners will recall that on Sunday, President Trump informed those who were seeking to be the next Senate Majority Leader that they, quote, must agree to approve his nominations, his cabinet nominations, on the basis of a recess appointment process rather than going through the constitutionally prescribed method of the Senate granting its advice and consent under Article 2, Section 2. And so what President Trump is looking for is a way to streamline the process. But, of course, what we run into here is a disregard of the reason why the framers of the Constitution made the appointment power a jointly held power, an equally shared power between the President and the Senate. In England, of course, the king could not only create offices but decide to fill them with his own preferences. The framers of the Constitution didn't like that because it lent itself to arbitrary choices and corruption and bribery and lots of terrible reasons for placing people in office. Thus, they separated the process of creating offices, which is by law, and the process for appointing people. And so under Article 2, the president nominates and, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint people to offices and to federal courts and so forth. So it's a shared power. The Senate is expected to carry out its role with diligence, carefully vetting the nominees for their qualifications and credentials. If these nominees were to be approved through a recess appointment, then it would run afoul of the reasons behind creating a jointly held power. And the recess appointment is only used when Congress is in recess. And that those occasions would arise, for example, as they did under the Constitution in the early years, when Congress might only be in session for 3 or 4 months, and the president would need to fill up a vacancy that has happened under Article 2, and in order to carry out his duties, including administering the law. But nowadays, the Congress is in session most of the time, and so there are few occasions when recess appointments have to happen. What this call from President-elect Trump is all about is really to avoid the process of holding confirmation hearings where the different committees would vet and carefully review the prospective nominees' credentials and qualifications. And that's important because the Senate has an important role. This is to serve the people of America, not the president. The Constitution was written for the American people, not for Congress, not for the president, not for American government. And there would be no reason at this point for the Senate to go into recess appointment. To be fair, there have been presidents of both parties and members of Congress of both parties who have played fast and loose with recess appointments. We don't want to deny that. But this is not an occasion where a recess appointment is necessary. Rather, a full, careful senatorial consideration of the nominees is desirable and serves the interests of the American people.
Okay.
I was just going to ask you, in the case of recess, it really is, what are the consequences if, say, the president gets a particular candidate that he wishes to have appointed through? Is there any recourse, especially if somebody may appear to be woefully not qualified?
And especially for a department that doesn't even exist yet, like the government for government efficiency.
Yeah.
That's right. And so if President Trump were to get his wish now, it would mean that those people whom he has nominated, essentially appointed, would serve out the remainder of his term for, in theory, the next 4 years, and the Senate would not have an opportunity to grant their advice and consent. They would have to move to impeach a Senate, a cabinet member, if in fact they found that person unworthy. It serves our interest to have a full consideration of the records of these nominees, particularly in the case of these nominees, in several cases where they don't have any experience, where they have not run a large organization such as the Pentagon or headed a major organization as the Department of Justice, for example. We need to know if these people are qualified, because we don't want because it's the United States cabinet. And while a president has the opportunity to name people whom he wants to represent him in these cabinets, it is, again, it bears reiteration, a co-equal power, because the Senate has responsibility to grant its advice and consent.
Okay.
And that shouldn't be ignored.
All right, let's get Ed on the line. He's been waiting. Ed, good morning. What's your question for Dr. Adler? Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a couple points here. You said that all votes should be counted equally. That's a good idea. But what about the Senate? I think a Montanan's citizen in Montana has more say in the makeup of the Senate than a citizen of California. So that's one thing. But you mentioned the bipartisan border bill. That's Senate Bill 4361. That's the one on which Trump supposedly put the kibosh. There were 43 yays. There were 50 nays. There were 7 who didn't vote. Okay, and in those 50 nays, there were about 6 Democrats who voted no, along with what Trump was suggesting. So the way I look at it, it was turned down in a bipartisan vote.
Okay, thanks for the call. I tell you what, we're up against. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Answer the question. Sorry. Go ahead.
Sure. I'll do it very quickly. No, that's an excellent call. When we have that closely divided vote, that meant that at that stage there was plenty of time and opportunity for compromise, and that would have happened, and that bill would have been approved by the Senate. Both sides said so. You know, when there are initial votes, and that means that there's room for people to work together to negotiate differences. There was so much support for it that would have sailed through and would have addressed the major problems involving immigration.
All right, with that, we're going to take a quick break. We have Lisa, Cody, Mr. Wingnut, and Jeff all waiting to visit with you in the last 18 minutes of our time together. And Bob Seidenschwarz here in the studio with the Montana World Affairs Council. We'll be back after this quick timeout. The 30th. Okay, we are back on Talkback, and lots of callers and very little time. And Bob Seidenschwarz here in the studio as well with Dr. David Adler from the Alturas Institute. Let's get Lisa on the line. She's been waiting. Hey, Lisa, go ahead, please.
Well, good morning. First of all, I would like to say to this gentleman, why don't you explain this bill that you constantly bring up, that President Trump talk people out of voting in favor of. What was all in it? If it would have been such a good bill and would have closed the border, trust me, it would have been voted in. Secondly, President Trump always makes the statement, you have an open border like we have been having for 4 years, an invasion of people from all over the world with their own traditions and their own educations or none. They come here in an open border, and we do not have a country anymore then. We have a hodgepodge of all kinds of societies that pretty quick want their rights. And I want to say another thing. I'm not against immigration. I am one myself. I came to this country after the war, and it took some doings to get here. I had to go through the hoops. I had to apply for a visa. I had to provide records that I was totally without any criminal hint of on my records. I could not have any disease. I was checked out. I had no TB. I had no venereal disease. Nor did I have certain vaccinations that I didn't have. Certainly, my parents were vetted as well, because after the war, there might have been war criminals. And then I had to have a sponsor. Without a sponsor, I could have never even come here. And I had to come to an open, legal entry. And when I got here, I had $4.65 in my pocket. I ended up in Montana, which I happen to love this state, and I rolled my sleeves up and went to work. And there was nobody from the government there giving me money and giving me this and giving me that. And I see all these people coming in here and having their flags from their own country.
Do you have a question, please, for David?
They will not integrate like I did.
Okay.
I couldn't integrate into this country and their traditions fast enough.
Okay.
These people won't do that.
Lisa.
And I'm all for legal immigration, but not for what we're having now.
Lisa, thanks for the call. A very, very passionate call there. Okay, Dr. Adler, go ahead.
Well, I appreciate that call and appreciate the experience of our caller in going through the immigration system. And it reflects, of course, that America is a nation of immigrants. And the reality here is that for the better part of 40 years or so, we have struggled to reform immigration law. Both parties have. Both parties end up playing some political football with immigration to serve their interests. The caller asked about this bill that could have become law because it had the bipartisan support in the Senate. It would have added more border agents to better secure the border. That's one. It would have added more judges to streamline and to expedite the hearings for those who wanted to come into the country. And it would have provided a lot of other things that would have helped to facilitate immigration. Instead, it was blocked. It was essentially killed by Donald Trump to serve his political interests. And so now the question is, what will the Republicans do? Because as everybody knows, the Republicans will control Washington in the presidency and Congress. So the immigration issues are now before the GOP-dominated Congress. Let's see what they will do to reform immigration. I think the first question is, will they reform immigration? Will they work off the bill that was led by Senator James Langford of Oklahoma? And if they embrace it, then it will be proof positive that Trump had essentially killed the bill that conservatives really wanted. I think that's the point to focus on here in the coming months.
Okay, let's get Cody up next. He's been waiting the longest. Cody, go ahead. You're on Talkback. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. You have to forgive me if you've already covered this. I don't get to listen as often as I like to. I only caught the end of it because it's important that I work hard so the government can take my money and give it to other people. So I don't get to listen as often and as thoroughly as I'd like to. Do I understand that you are advocating for a purely a popular vote, I've done a lot of study on the Electoral College. This was one of the things that disturbed me. I did a lot of years worth of study on it, and that was when I realized that a purely popular vote moves all the power to just a few major cities, the most populated cities. At that point, anybody outside those cities, especially rural areas like farming communities, have no vote. And that is the truth of it. So, first of all, are you trying to advocate for that? And, yeah, that's my first question.
Okay, thanks for the call. Dr. Adler, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that call. And let me just say how much I'm enjoying all these calls. I appreciate the enthusiasm and participation of those calling into the show. Yes, and so the reality here is that the Electoral College denies the fundamental principle of political equality. That is the foundational principle of American constitutionalism. And so, yes, I am an advocate for the direct popular vote, the direct election system, and it would not place all the power in larger cities necessarily. It would give everybody the opportunity to have a say. And the very fact that Donald Trump won the popular vote this time around by some 2 to 3 million indicates that larger blue states, if that's the implication, are not going to be able to dominate. And the reason why is because, as I mentioned at the outset of the show, there are many competing interests within states. Not everybody within a state, red or blue, large or small, is going to share the same interest. There are a lot of conflicts, as you know, and that's why in many states the elections are so close. And so the Electoral College does not serve the interest of small states. What it does serve is the interest of the majority party, which means those who are not part of the majority party are essentially not being able to register their vote in the election. This way, everybody would be able to offer their view, make their views and voices and votes known in an equal way. To put the burden back on those who would want to retain the Electoral College, we would say what features about it justify denial of political equality. In a democracy, to deny political equality is to essentially disenfranchise some citizens in order to favor others. And it's hard to see a rationale for doing that.
Okay, with that, we're up against a break. We're going to come right back. It's our final timeout, and we have more callers. I know Bob would like to talk as well. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. We're coming right back after this 1-minute timeout. Okay, welcome back to Talk Back. Time rapidly running out, and our time with Dr. David Adler from the Alturas Institute. And Dr. Adler, thank you for taking all these calls. It's amazing, and we appreciate it. Let's get Emmett has been waiting the longest, I guess. Emmett, good morning. You're on with Dr. Adler. Quickly, what's your question?
Well, thanks for taking my call. Well, actually, Cody stole my thunder pretty much. That was an excellent call. I often don't agree with him, but Rush Limbaugh did defend the Electoral College by saying, the rural states will have as much say as, let's say, blue states or the states with big cities like Los Angeles or, big states like New York. We don't want New York and California dominating. I know that Donald Trump won the popular vote this time. Ronald Reagan did, so did George Bush. But oftentimes, over and over again, the big blue states like California do dominate. If we had the popular vote, Democrats would win again and again and again.
Emmett, we're really short of time. Do you have a specific question for Dr. Adler, real quick?
Yes, I do. About your comment about, rural states, and being left out, don't you think that rural states now do have just as much as a voice for local issues, that kind of thing, rather than just big states? It's kind of defeating your question. Plus, if you could answer, if the big candidates just go to, let's say, battleground states, then why did Donald Trump visit Montana twice?
All right.
If you could answer those questions.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks for the call. Go ahead, Dr. Adler.
Yeah, thank you. The good call. I appreciate that. So I would make 2 points. First of all, the rural states, like urban dominated states, don't necessarily share the same interest. I've mentioned this a couple of times, but there are conflicting economic interests, and so that helps to explain the ability of members of different parties to be elected in small states. Number two, Donald Trump, and a good point, Donald Trump visited Montana in order to campaign for Tim Sheehy, but that's a rare occasion. For example, in the year of 2000, the presidential candidates never visited any small state. I mean, it's been documented, for example, that just one of 7 states with 3 electoral votes, just 1 out of 7 of the states with only 3 electoral votes received a visit from a presidential candidate. We don't want the selection of the president to hinge on a few battleground states, to leave Americans in 40 other states feeling like they're watching a foreign election. We want everybody to be part of the selection of the highest office in the nation. And so, again, the question would be, why would those advocating the retention of the Electoral College be willing to surrender political equality for their fellow citizens?
Dr. Adler, I know that one of the things we wanted to talk about real quickly before we wrap things up is NATO.
NATO.
Yes.
Can the president unilaterally take us out of our treaty with NATO?
Yes, the answer is no, constitutionally speaking. I've written a book on this, on the Constitution and treaty termination, and several articles. The framers of the Constitution did not support the idea of unilateral presidential termination. They believe that treaties should be terminated in the same way they're made, by the president and the Senate acting together. Moreover, it was just in this last year that the Senate passed a bipartisan resolution to indicate that the president could not remove America from NATO. If that were possible, then one person could upset the carefully crafted mechanism for making treaties that govern American foreign policy. The framers were opposed to unilateral presidential action in foreign affairs, preferring the careful discussion and debate by the people's representatives to decide how to promote America's foreign policy interests.
Got about 2.5 minutes, Bob, so go ahead.
Do we have any other callers,
no,
Peter?
We're good.
So in the case where you just described, can a president that has control of the houses, can he exert influence for a change to that type of policy, or would that have to be a constitutional amendment?
That's an excellent question. The reality here is that political influence will carry the day. It would be very possible for the incoming president, to convince his colleagues in the Senate and the House to pass a law that would permit the president to terminate treaties unilaterally, which would mean that the president would be able to terminate all of our treaty obligations, those involving NATO or in Asia, for example, and any other treaties that we have. And that would upset, as I say, that carefully calibrated balance by which the framers agreed to grant the treaty-making power to the president and the Senate, because the Constitution is silent on the question about the constitutional authority to terminate treaties. In theory, that opens the question. But everything said in Philadelphia about making sure that the treaty power would be retained intact by the President and the Senate spoke against the idea of unilateral termination. And in fact, John Jay, in Federalist number 64, said that the President could not terminate treaties. James Madison said the same thing. There was nobody in the Constitutional Convention, it should be pointed out, that was advocating unilateral authority of the president to make treaties, let alone terminate treaties.
Dr. Adler, we are completely out of time. Thank you so much for taking all these calls and being such a good sport, and we appreciate it.
Love to have you back.
You bet, absolutely. And thank you so much for being on our show today.
Well, very much my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I look forward to returning.
Thank you, sir. Take care. All right. So, Mr. Nick, what's coming up on tomorrow's fabulous program, sir?
We'll be on from 9 to 10, and we'll have Attorney General Austin Knudsen.
All right. So there you go. And again, thank you to, we had, I can't even count how many callers we had today. And you guys are awesome. You're making this definitely your show, and that's what it's all about. That's what Talkback was intended for, was for you folks to have a voice and be able to ask questions of our guests, and we really appreciate you all calling in today. And of course, we're going to continue that tomorrow with Attorney General Austin Knudsen. He'll be with us from 9 to 10. Before that, of course, it'll be Hunter's Breakfast live from Paradise Falls with the captain and his crew. So get out there and make it a great day, everybody. Thank you for listening.
Now you can get Cox Internet and one unlimited mobile line for $80 a month, all with Wi-Fi equipment included and no annual contract. If only getting it all was always that easy. Like having a night out and getting a good night's sleep. Get it all with Cox. Get Cox Internet and one unlimited mobile line for $80 a month. Visit cox.com/value. Limited time offer for new customers only. No annual contract means no minimum term agreement and no early termination fees. Additional restrictions apply.